shape, crossover, step back, at the buzzer.
Are you serious? Wow, can't believe it.
Gives it to Jenkins for the championship. Yeah, send it in, Jerome.
Welcome back into Finding Nylon, episode 7. Guys, it's been a little bit. We've had a lot of college basketball news, a lot of really big games. We're in literally prime basketball season now. College football season is over. NFL's in the playoffs. Everyone, it feels like, is tuning in to every college basketball game that they possibly can at this point in the season. We've got a lot to talk about. We're going to dive right in, fellas. Looking at the new AP poll, a lot of shifting has gone on, not necessarily atop the AP poll, as we see Houston and Kansas 1-2, then 3, of course, is Purdue, but we've got a lot of shifting under that. It's especially topical, being the topic of today's episode, the Big 12. We're filming this on Tuesday night. We just saw a overtime thriller in Kansas between Kansas State and Kansas. Carson, I'm going to turn the floor to you because I know you were dialed in on this game. Jalen Wilson looks like the player of the year, even in a loss to Kansas State.
Yeah, I mean, I think both teams, it sounds stupid, but it literally, watching that game, I felt like both teams were trying to lose that game. There were so many stupid mistakes. There were so many, neither team shot well. There was a lot of missed free throws. The officiating was a little dicey in my eyes, both ways. I feel like there were some missed calls and some ticky-tack calls. So it just was inconsistent. But like you said about Jalen Wilson, watching him tonight, this was my first time watching Kansas for a full 40 minutes. I think he almost had 40 points, if not 40. And you can tell that team runs through him. They had a few guys foul out, including Grady Dick, and then Adams, their big guy, towards the end. So it was literally all on him, and Kansas State still couldn't stop him. So yeah, I mean, once he gets to his right hand and gets to the you get him on the wing, get the ball to his right hand, no one's guarding him going to the hoop. That was an incredible game. I think the Big 12 is going to be just a rock fight this year. There's so many really good teams. But Kansas State looks really, really good. It's really fun watching Keontae Johnson be this good after what happened a couple years ago. Jerome Tang, first year head coach, and he has them at 16-2 right now, and they're rolling. So I mean, they just they're coming off a brutal loss to TCU, and then to beat Kansas a couple of days later. That's insanely impressive.
Yeah, no, and I completely agree. And Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you because you and I, back a few years ago when Keontae was at Florida, got to see him play, and he was lights out there, gets kind of the rebound going to Kansas State. Obviously, this is one of the really cool stories. I think this is why people fall in love with college basketball. But this Kansas State team is a legit contender, and I don't think anyone expected it. But what's it been like to see them play? Obviously, Matt, it's kind of cool for you and I because we saw this guy so long ago, and seeing what he's been through, it's been a lot. It's been really cool.
Yeah, I mean, that play at the end of the game to Keontae Johnson, that was one of the coolest finishes I've seen in a basketball game in a really long time. That alley-oop past him was a really great drawn-up play.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, this guy last year, he didn't play he hasn't played at all the last 2 years. And it's his first full season comeback. He spent 34 minutes a game, he's averaging around 19 points. And I think it's just another great example of the transfer portal. And even though, I mean, he had a very specific, rare incident happen, but it's just another example of how the transfer portal works and how you can become a star at any other school.
Yeah, no, and we've talked about it time and time again. It's really cool when the transfer portal works in a good way for once, and it helps guys like Keontae Johnson or just guys that couldn't really stick with the team that they were sticking with for whatever reason it would be, whether it's medical, kind of off the court stuff. But when they get to go to a new place and be just as impactful, or if not more, at the new place, and it's a better fit, it's just a really cool to see that. But obviously, Kansas loses that game. You're not too worried about that if you're the Jayhawks because you move on. You've got a lot more Big 12 games, and we'll get into it later. But this is a conference that it seems like you can make up ground really quick just by winning because so many teams are ranked. And we will get into the specifics of that later in the episode. But looking at Purdue, no question, they're going to stay atop at number 3. They've only lost to Rutgers on that last second shot. That was a really awesome game. Alabama, they're moving up and up. They're staying undefeated in conference play for the SEC, and Nate Oates' squad looks really good this year. I think another team that we want to talk about now is UCLA. Quietly, these guys in the Pac-12 have just been inching up and up and up. Mick Cronin's a seasoned veteran coach, and he has got his team playing really well this year.
Yeah, I mean they've shot into the top 5 really like insanely quietly. Like they aren't getting like nearly enough attention. The Big 12 isn't exactly like a powerhouse. I mean, you got like UCLA, and then I will say if Arizona is going to struggle like they have the last couple weeks, like I don't see how UCLA doesn't win this conference. Mick Cronin has a very veteran team this year with a bunch of with a few really talented freshmen as well. So, I mean, yeah, they just keep winning. I mean, I think the Pac-12 easily runs through them this year. I'm not saying Arizona's bad, but I mean, they've looked about as shaky as you could get the last couple weeks. They just got pummeled by Oregon by like 20 points and then lost on their home floor to, I believe, Washington State. I think it was Washington or Washington State. So, I mean, a terrible start to Pac-12 play for them, and UCLA looks way, way, way better.
Yeah. Tommy Lloyd's squad, that was another team. They dropped down from, they were in the top 10, they dropped down to 11. It just feels like that's a team that is very shaky. That loss that they had at home, I think they were 14, 15-point favorites in that
It was like, yeah. I think it was 12 because a lot of people were like, why is it so low? And then they go on and lose. They're down by like almost 20 at one point. They fought back within the last couple of minutes, but like it was like, well, I mean, either Washington State was better than people expected, or I mean, as we're seeing now, Arizona is shaky at best.
Yeah, they are struggling. But yeah, it just feels like the Pac-12 is going to run through UCLA. Then looking at 6, Gonzaga, we've talked about them a bunch. They just keep winning in conference play. I tweeted about it last week. They have some slow starts. They really get you to kind of hold your breath, but they usually come out atop those West Coast games. Texas, number 7. We're going to talk about them a little bit more when we get to Big 12, but they lose a tough one at Iowa State tonight. Iowa State's another really good team, but Texas, you kind of felt like that bubble was going to burst at some point. They were playing really well after the whole Chris Beard thing. They kind of escape with some wins at home against Texas Tech. They've looked a little shaky. They finally lose a game, but it feels like they'll be able to bounce back from this one. The final in that one was 78, to 67. It feels like Texas will be able to recover from that in the end, does it not?
Yeah, I mean, like you said earlier, like in the Big 12 this year, I mean, in a couple of days, you'll be able to get that win back, so to speak. Like the other thing is like winning on the road this year in the Big 12 is going to be brutal. Like that's one thing I've already picked up. It feels like from watching the first few weeks of this conference, first couple weeks or so, like going on the road in this conference, going to Kansas State, you saw that game tonight. Iowa State at home against Texas, like these teams are going to defend their home court. And if you want to win this conference, you better defend home court because it is so competitive and you're not going to steal a road win like at Kansas. If you do somehow, then props to you. But like stealing road wins in this conference is going to be brutal. Whoever does it, whoever steals a couple is going to win the conference. I'll say that right now. Like, I mean, it's just going to be brutal. It's a rock fight this year.
Yeah. And looking forward in the rankings, it feels the same way in the Big East this year in terms of the top teams. I think out of the top 4 top teams, there's only 3 home losses in there. So it just feels like those 2 conferences, because Xavier, number 8, right behind Texas, they've been winning at home. They have not had a road real test just yet. Besides St. John's, that was kind of a test, but it was early in the season. But that's another conference at Xavier with 8 in the Big East that it's going to be who can steal a couple of road games and defend home court. And that's what we'll get to Xavier when we get to State of the Union here in a bit. At number 9, Tennessee, they dropped only 4 spots with that win or that loss, against Kentucky. Carson, you made a good point talking with some of our buddies. It felt like anyone goes in to Knoxville and wins that game, does it not?
I mean, Tennessee played about as bad as you could play, and they still like almost won that game. I mean, good win for Kentucky, like quote unquote. Like, yeah, you beat a top 5 team at the time, but like I'm not going to discount Kentucky here because like we'll get to that later. But it was a good win. I just don't think it was that impressive if you actually watch the game. Like Tennessee played, like I said, about as bad as you could. Missed a ton of layups. Terrible shooting night. Their best players didn't show up. So yeah, I mean, they had a big win tonight. Well, good win against Mississippi State on the road. Never easy to win on the road. So yeah, I think they're good, but that loss to Kentucky could end up being pretty bad depending on how Kentucky finishes the season.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And then at number 10, Virginia, Tony Bennett's squad, they just keep winning in ACC play. I'm interested to see how they do in some of those tougher matchups in the ACC down the line, but that team, they just keep winning right now. They're going to keep moving up. We talked about Arizona at 11, 12, 13, 14, Iowa State, Kansas State, TCU. We talked about Iowa State and Kansas State both picked up huge wins tonight. TCU's playing some of their best ball. They just beat Kansas State over the weekend. We will get to them with the Big 12, but that's what we're talking about. 3 back-to-back-to-back teams, all at the middle of the top 25 in that conference. It's just, like you said, Carson, it's a rock fight this year, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. UConn, they dropped to 15. Matt, I'm going to bring you in here. Is it time to hit the panic button if you're a Huskies fan?
Yeah, it definitely is, because I think now it's starting to seem like that run at the beginning of the year was a little bit, you peaked too early.
Yeah.
Because if they weren't hitting their panic button already, that loss at home against St. John's, that can't happen. I mean, I don't think St. John's will win at Creighton this year. Like, there's teams that are mediocre teams that will win at home against St. John's. So it's really not looking good for UConn at all. They've lost 4 of the last 5. They're kind of falling out of position in the Big East at this point. So, and they got a hard game at Seton Hall coming up, and if they lose that, and I think their Big East hopes are gone.
Yeah, no, they've definitely, it looks like, dropped out of that top tier of the Big East. Credit to St. John's. They've got Joel Soriano. They've got a couple other guys, Curbelo. They've got some pieces, but I just don't think Mike Anderson's that good of a coach. We saw it on the mic'd up game. I mean, all the other coaches in the Big East coach circles around him. Credit to his guys. They pick up that win, but you're absolutely right, Matt. That can't happen as a top 25 team. Like you said, they've lost 4 out of the last 5. You were all right with the Xavier loss because Xavier seems like a good team this year, but some of these other losses, they got to tighten it up for sure.
I mean, I will say, like, the loss against Xavier was bad. I mean, the loss against Xavier is fine, but then, I mean, they also lost at Providence and at Marquette, and those are 3 really good. Those are 3 teams at the top of the league.
Yeah.
So, like, when I was saying, like, if you weren't hitting the panic button before, that's fine, but you can't lose St. John's at home double digits. I mean, that's when I really kind of figured out this team was really struggling.
Yeah, that's got to be give me game. Simple as that for Hurley's squad. Then moving under that at 16, Auburn. They pick up a win against Mississippi State, which I'm going to be petty. I was right. Mississippi State has looked like absolute pile of dog crap in the SEC. Their only win is against Ole Miss, who's also a terrible team. They're 1-5 now. It's time to hang it up if you're Mississippi State. The fact that you were ever ranked is just a complete and utter joke. And then, but Auburn, good for them. Bruce Pearl's squad, they just keep winning. They're at 14-3. They're certainly going to be a team to look out for going forward. We talked about Miami, Florida. They picked up a win against Syracuse. They dropped to 17 this week, but it just seems once again, Larinaga, he wins a lot. He wins very often, and that's how it's shaping up for Miami in the ACC. Number 18, Charleston. We talked about him before. Pat Kelsey's squad. I think they've won, 18 in a row now, something like that, and they are rolling. Then under them, checking in, was Clemson. They stay at 19. They're winning a lot. They're at 15-3. They picked up a win against Duke. Clemson, are you guys high on them? What do we think of Clemson? Obviously, this is a team that's kind of shot up just because they keep winning. They picked up a big non-conference win against Penn State at home earlier this year. What do you guys like about Clemson? Is there any worries that you have possibly as well?
I think they're losing. Is that game over yet? I think they're losing Wake Forest right now.
They're not,
Yes.
There's 12 minutes left. They're down 7.
Ooh,
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you kind of said it perfectly. Like, they're a team
Wake
that's
Forest
winning
isn't
right
like
now.
a bad team though.
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Wake Forest is solid.
Yeah.
Matt, you go ahead. We cut you off. You were saying.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think Rangers had it right. Like, Clemson just keeps on winning. That's why they are where they are. I don't think they're like. I don't see a ton of promise for them. I'm not gonna say they're like bad, like Rangers like say about Mississippi State, but I think they just keep on winning games.
Yeah.
And they're also in an ACC conference this year that's struggling. I mean, when both Duke and North Carolina aren't even in the top 5 of the ACC, I mean, that's opening up the road for them. So I was like, yeah, like Matt says, as long as they keep winning, because like even teams like Miami, like they're shaky. I mean, they lose like every other game. It feels like, or like they don't play well and not a very good consistent team. And like in Virginia, I mean, with how poor of an offensive team they are, if they're off offensively, I mean, they get beat as we've seen several times this year. But
Yeah, nah, it's not a great conference this year. Let's call it what it is. But looking under them, Marquette at 20, even with that loss to Xavier, they move up 5 spots. Marquette seems like a really good team. It took everything Xavier had at home to beat them. Then at 21, Baylor. We'll get to them when we talk Big 12. Providence at 22. After the loss to Creighton, they dropped 3 spots, but you still feel fine if you're Ed Cooley's squad. Rutgers checking in at 23. They've picked up some wins. They got that win at Ohio State. That was a really big win for them. FAU at 24 now. They are 16-1. It's another team. They just keep winning. And Arkansas drops to 25. Carson, is it time to worry if you're Arkansas after that brutal loss at Vanderbilt?
I don't know if it's time to worry. I mean, if you watch that Vanderbilt game, like they didn't miss, or Arkansas didn't really play well, but I don't think it's time to like get too freaked out yet. I still think they're kind of young and still maybe like not meshing, but like you're still just gonna have some down games, especially when you're kind of reliant on freshmen. I think like 3 or 4 of their best players are freshmen, so you're gonna have down games. But with the SEC this year, I mean, it's hard to right now. It's hard to see a team like I don't know. I think Alabama's clearly the top dog. They just beat LSU by 40. I think if Brandon Miller's playing really well, they're very, very difficult to beat. So, but no, I think I'd like to see how I'm curious to see how they bounce back, but definitely not a great loss against Vanderbilt, but I'm not going to get too freaked out yet.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's fair to have those debates because it certainly is a team that has struggled in some games and they've struggled in SEC play, but they can definitely turn it around and kind of stay in that top 25 if they rebound well off of that loss. Talking about SEC, it's a very constantly topical thing. You can't really escape it. Are we really panicking in Lexington? Is Kentucky even going to make the tournament this year?
I don't think Kentucky should be in the top like 40 or 50 of the rankings right now. Like, yeah, they beat Tennessee. That's a good win. But other than that, they haven't really beaten anyone. And then you lose to South Carolina at home. I don't care how well South Carolina played in that game. They're like, I think either in like the high 200s of Ken Pom or like low 300s. They're a terrible basketball team. And to lose to them at home is really embarrassing. I think they're losing to Georgia right now at home as well. Georgia's not bad, but like you got to defend home court against unranked teams. Like sounds simple, but you just like kind of have to do that if you want to be a good team and be a tournament team. I think, I've had this take for a little bit, but they're like 11-6. I think if you take the name off the front of their jersey, they're nowhere near the tournament. But since they're Kentucky, since it's John Calipari, like people are still just assuming they're going to make the tournament this year.
Yeah. Even if they don't make,
I was just going to say, as of right now, they just took the lead against Georgia. It's got 14:56 left, 50-47. But you're right. Georgia's a good team, but you should not be really keeping this game that close at home in Lexington. Cole, what do you got?
Even like if they don't make the tournament, they're just gonna be like an unnecessarily like destructive team. Like they're just gonna like win random games like they beat Tennessee because they're simply like, I mean, they're 5-stars, even though like they can't play together. I mean, like it's amazing if they can like find 3 players, have an average game. But like for other teams like Tennessee, they're just gonna like beat them randomly like in some game in February. That's gonna like destroy the team's season simply because it's Kentucky. And like if they somehow find a way to make the tournament, like I have a weird feeling they'd like win a game or two just because like when no one the 1 year like no one talks about them and they're horrible, they'll just find a way to win a game.
Yeah, I think they play Kansas next week. I'm really curious. They play them at home too. Like they're gonna somehow win that game, right? Like
exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Kansas is just infinitely better. Like should run laps around them, but like they'll somehow win that game.
They're gonna beat a team that like they have no business beating simply because it's Kentucky and it's a bunch of 5-stars running around.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I will say about Kentucky, if you're Xavier Wheeler, you got to take a long, long, long look in the mirror because they went in to Knoxville And they looked, now granted, we talked about it. Tennessee played horribly, but they looked light years better and more efficient on offense when he's not out there. Same thing happened. He checks into this game and they kind of struggle again and they take him out off the bench. Xavier Wheeler, I think he's going to hit the portal about as hard as can be here in the next, right at the end of the season.
He came from Georgia too, so this is kind of like a revenge game.
Yeah.
I would hope. I don't know how well he's playing or if he's playing well at all, but yeah, I mean, you take I remember the announcers during the Tennessee game were talking about it. Like they just had way more length with Frederick kind of running the point. Like Wheeler's what, like 5'8", 5'9", like
the bowling ball,
kind of a pudgy point guard, like kind of a throwback. He's like, he doesn't do much on offense, and obviously it's a matchup nightmare on defense if they have a lengthy point guard. So like taking him off the floor, I think just automatically makes you better. I hate saying that because like, I mean, like kind of feel bad for the dude. He's a starting point guard at Kentucky. You would think that's like a privilege, but he's just not it. Like he's just not the guy that needs to be running the show for them.
Speaking of, just one comment. Speaking of Brandon Miller, Carson got a double-double tonight with 26 points. So
him and Jarris Walker from Houston are the two got to be the two best freshmen in the country.
Vanderbilt just gave him a game though. I mean, they're going to lose by like 6.
Vandy seems to be another team that's just going to be like a gnat this year. Just like knock off a few big teams and like having a few games where you're like, how is this team? Yeah,
it was being in Nashville this weekend. I didn't even like realize that we got down there right when the game ended, and like out in Nashville, like there was like Vanderbilt fans everywhere, like celebrating after the game. It was like the last fan base I think I'd ever see like out in the streets would be Vanderbilt fans, and they were there. So
yeah. No. All right. One last thing. We got a couple more minutes of this segment before we move on. We got to talk about, you saw the soundbite on Twitter, Chris Mooney of Richmond talking about after their game, he expects that Richmond might not make the tournament. And he said the reason is always that the committee says their schedule was not strong enough. He asserted in his conference that they could not schedule better than they do. And he gave a challenge to John Rothstein for the conference to give him $50,000 to find 8 home games for that conference. But John Rothstein, if he can't find the 8 games, has to tweet every day one of the teams and their reason why they wouldn't schedule a team like Richmond. Cole, we're going to hand this to you because this kind of goes along with Dayton. Is this a real problem, or is it just Richmond just not putting in their due diligence and finding actual opponents? Because obviously Dayton's in a similar spot.
I get completely what Mooney has to say. I mean, I feel the same way. Like, and you guys know, it's like the reason Xavier and Dayton don't play each other anymore is because neither team has anything to gain from it. Like Xavier, like why Xavier or why is Dayton going to agree to go to the other team's place and like run the risk of losing a game earlier in the season? Because like, and like if they win, it's like, oh, congrats. Like, I mean, most years like Xavier's expected to win, but like, you know, years maybe like last year when Xavier wasn't as good and Dayton was, you know, a bubble team, or like, you know, in 2020, like teams that like Dayton should win, but like why would Xavier agree to do that, or like vice versa? Why would Dayton agree to do that? But I mean, yeah, Dayton. I mean, they're like a bigger A10 name, obviously, but like, you know, they schedule teams with like Ole Miss, Georgia, or Virginia Tech. They played Georgia, and so like they'll play those teams like 1 or 2 of those games every year. But it's like it's the teams that, you know, every team has to play, but they just have like a couple more games. So I agree with them. Like, I understand why those teams don't agree to play them, because the teams have nothing to agree. Like there's a bad example. Like a Kentucky, like in a normal year, like why would they agree to like play Dayton when like there's a chance they lose? Yeah. Like, no, it's really annoying, like being a Dayton fan, but like at the same time I get it. Like I wish they would do that. Like play these games, because like that's great. Like, you know, you're gonna get massive amounts of attendance and attention, and so like I think they should do it. But at the same time, like I get why they don't.
Yeah, I mean, cool. I mean, I understand like from like a A10 team standpoint, like it does suck like getting an at-large bid if you don't win your conference. But I mean, like Xavier was in the A10 like the late 2000s, early 2010s. And like they played like really, they were able to schedule really good teams like Tennessee, LSU, Virginia, obviously UC every year, Gonzaga, Creighton. Like they were able to get since they were good every year that they've had these 30-win years. They were able to get good teams to come to Cintas. But I do kind of hear your point. I feel like now at this point, it's in college basketball, teams don't really want to play on the road as much as they used to.
Yeah. I feel, Matt, I think that's actually a really good point. I feel like that's a lost art for some reason of like a good old fashioned go into someone's house, beat them on their own court and get out of town. Like, I feel like people just I feel like there a lot of stress was put on that back in the day. And just for some reason now people would rather just play 5 neutral court games, 1 away game before conference.
I think the thing is too, like
I get
a
it,
Big
though.
12 team or like a Big 12 team or like a Big 10 team doesn't need it like literally at all compared to an A10 team.
Yeah.
Like we're talking about Dayton, who probably needs to win the A10 to make the tournament. Like they have an at-large chance, but like they probably have to win the A10. They need any help they can get in the out of conference. So, but like if you're a Big 12 team or a Big 10 team, like you can afford to play cupcakes and out of conference.
Yeah.
Because you can make that up throughout the whole conference schedule.
Exactly.
So like we said, like it's just one of those things, like neither side is likely to budge. Like it's just like an A10 team isn't really going to want to go to Purdue and just get bludgeoned. And then like that's another out of conference loss. So, and then like Purdue doesn't want to go to Dayton because they're not going to get much out of it. Like that's an example, but I don't know. It's hard.
That's the problem. Is like 95% of A10 teams, like Power 5 schools are going to beat. It's the Daytons and like VCU most years that are like, I mean, there's a good chance they lose. Like,
yeah.
And so like, especially, I mean, like 2020, like, I mean, they was one of the top 3 teams in the country. Like no team like that year is going to be like, oh yeah, let's go play there. Let's have them here. Cause especially if you lose at home, like, yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah.
But, yeah. I mean, Dayton still gets in like one of the top 3 tournaments, like preseason tournaments every year. Like, I mean, they're in the battle for Atlantis this year, played Wisconsin, NC State. I mean, BYU's not great, but like they're with all the big dogs. So they get like 3 or 4 like very notable teams every year, which is nice. Yeah. It's the lower half of the A10 teams that just get screwed over.
Yeah. I think a big part of this too, like obviously we get what Mooney is saying, but like Richmond also sucks. So like, who cares? Like
I was gonna say that, Rangers.
Yeah,
I was gonna say like I wouldn't take us more seriously if it like.
Yeah, if it was Dayton
Anthony Grant said it.
Yeah, if it was Anthony Grant coming out and saying that, or like VCU's coach, I'd be like, all right. But like, if you stink, like, why would anyone want to play you?
Yeah, you get nothing out of it. So, but now this is a good segue. Cole, State of the Union. You talked about VCU. Tough loss to Dayton. I will say, this is one thing I want to preface it with. I watched the end of that game. The injuries were extremely apparent. Not having a true ball handler killed you guys in that game.
Yeah. I watched every minute of that game, and it was like they came out hot. It was like, okay, good. Like this is what we needed. And then it was just, like you said, I mean, I don't think that's the only reason they lost, but like, yeah, I mean, it was just like more like time management. Yeah, being able to just like hold on the ball. I mean, anytime you play VCU, it's terrifying just because they press the whole game.
Yeah.
Without 2 point guards. Like that was like the only game this year I was really like, other than like the UNLV game, but like this is like the first game since they've both been hurt that I was like, wow, like I actually miss them. Because like I low-key thought that like they might be a better team without the 2 on the floor necessarily. Like they've played really well. They're the tallest team in college basketball when they're both hurt.
Yeah.
It's the scrappy team like VCU that, I mean, will get to you. But like, yeah, I mean, if Dayton would have went, if not lost that game, like they go undefeated in A10 play, which like realistically they should do. They're favored in every single game.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an at-large bid. And now it's like, probably. I mean, I'm expecting them to still win every game. It's just going to VCU, like, not fun. And that was really aggravating. It would have been one thing if they just like right from the gun lost it, like, okay, like, all right, whatever. It's just the fact that they look so dominant in the first half, and then like it's just like, oh, here we go again.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think the main thing too with that loss is that now the at-large bid, it's still there, but it's like you really can't bank on it. Now it feels like you're gonna need to win the conference title, which I don't think they can't do. I think Dayton can absolutely be a team.
that should be the expectation.
But obviously, March is madness. You can never bank on it.
That's so brutal that one conference loss is like, all right, like are we still in a good spot? Like
And
that's
most years it wouldn't be like that. It's just because
right.
the A10 is awful. Like this is the worst that they've had in like
it's terrible.
Exactly. Yeah.
No. All right. Cole, thanks for giving us your update. Carson, what do you got? UC, not much has happened. They've won the games they should have won. Houston, it was a tough loss. What do you got on those couple bouts that you guys have had?
The Houston game went kind of how I expected. I kind of hate saying that. I was hoping for a miracle, maybe steal one against them, but I mean, I think Houston came out flat in that game. If people were watching that game, you could tell like Houston they weren't playing great. I mean, UC got off to like a 5-0 start, 6-0 start, something like that. But then it literally looked like Houston started trying, and then they like from there it just completely flipped. The biggest thing that just stood out to me, and it sounds obvious, but the talent is just ridiculous between them and UC right now. That's no fault to Wes Miller. Like he inherited a step above a grade school basketball team, and he's rebuilding that. It's going to be a process, but like it was just frustrating because it's one of the we've beat a dead horse by saying Locken needs to stay on the floor if they want to have a chance. But especially in that game, Jarris Walker is somehow 18 years old, and he is an absolutely gigantic human being. And he looked like one of the best players in college basketball. I didn't know he could shoot threes. I saw him shoot a three, and he made it, and I was like, we're so screwed. Like this dude can like Locken was on him too. I was like, this is not good. I didn't think he could shoot. That's my own fault. I didn't do enough research on this kid, but he's made 1 3, and I was like, you got to be kidding me. Like this dude's like 6'10", can handle the ball. They're so talented between him and Sasser, and then a couple other guys. Like they have every piece you need to win a championship, which is why they're number one. The SMU game was ugly, but you get a win on the road. I mean, the game wasn't like, it obviously came down to the wire, but I didn't ever like get super nervous because I don't know. I feel like we just had that game controlled. Victor Locken had like 8 blocks. He played great. But now you have a USF coming up tomorrow, and then a big one against Memphis at home Sunday. So they have a chance against Memphis to kind of pick up a big win. But I mean, like they've kind of lost the games I've expected them to lose and won the games I've expected them to win. So I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah. The only thing I'd have to say about that too is like, if they like beat Memphis, that'd be a big win. And then like obviously they play Houston next at Houston, which if they lose to Memphis or like it would somehow like get like blown out, which like I don't think they will. I mean, it'll be close. There's a good chance they lose, also a good chance they win. But if they like lose that game and get like dominated going to Houston, like they're actually gonna lose by 40. But if they like win that game and look good, like I'm not gonna say I hope that they'll win, but like it's unfortunate. I wish that was the home game against Houston, because if they come off Memphis playing well, it's like, oh, like there's like a dark horse shot. But now it's like, I mean, they lose the Memphis, it's like 40 point blowouts on the way.
Yeah, I mean Houston's insanely good. Like they're the number one team in the country. Like I've been talking about them a lot, but like the way they play, they have a suffocating defense, and if they're shooting the ball well, like I don't know how many teams are beating them, if I'm being completely honest. I love the way they play. I hate saying that because like I'm kind of supposed to hate Houston, but they remind me of like old UC teams with the way they play defense. And I love the way they play. I think Kelvin Sampson's an incredible coach, top like 3 or 4 in college basketball right now. So I think like the conference obviously runs through them, and I think they'll definitely be a contender for a national championship.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. UC's going to just have to win some games down the stretch to give themselves a chance. Now flipping to Xavier, Matt, XU just keeps winning, 7-0 in the conference. They've got the Big East in a chokehold right now. Granted, they have not played Providence, which I think is like the last kind of a infinity stone for the gauntlet, but you pick up a big win against Creighton and then against Marquette. You now look towards the Paul. What are you liking about the Muskies right now?
I mean, I love how they're taking care of business. People like the point that they're barely winning games, and what I like to say is that like UConn started off the season blowing out everybody, and once they found themselves in a close game at Xavier, they couldn't close out the game.
Yeah.
And like I love winning these close games right now because I think that's building us so well towards March.
Yeah.
Like if we can continue to win these close games, I mean, granted, we're winning a lot of these close games at home, but like we keep on winning these close games against tournament teams, and that should, or I mean, that should be the same thing in the tournament. So they're looking really great right now. It's kind of just crazy what's going on because I think the last time we talked, they were ranked like 22nd. Now they're number 8.
Yeah.
We haven't seen them like ranked in January like in 5 years. So
Yeah.
it's really just wild what's going on. I mean, at every single game, I'm expecting a loss because I'm just so used to the last 4 years. But it's looking like they're not going to potentially have a loss until the 25th at UConn. So they should go 9. They should be 9-0 in conference play come the UConn game.
Yeah, it feels that way right now, and you're right. It feels like they're playing March-esque games, winning last-second shots. Soleil Boom being the closer for this team. And once again, now that you have won these conference games, you feel a whole hell of a lot better about the Gonzaga loss, about the Duke loss. Even Indiana, who has struggled now, you feel good because you see the growth of finishing the games. Obviously, the Gonzaga one should have been a win. Duke probably could have been a win, and Indiana should have been a win as well.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what you said was what I was going to say. Those 3 games is all about closing the games, and now they're closing the games against teams that they should be winning games against. We really should be on the feed right now, in my opinion. I think you would say the same thing, right, Rangers?
Yeah, I mean, now seeing what we've seen now, if they could have just pulled out those games, it's not crazy to say they could be.
Yeah, I think we lost the Duke game, but Gonzaga and Indiana, that hurts really bad. But yeah, I mean, they're probably gonna be 17-3 by next week, and hopefully they're top 6 in the rankings after Texas lost tonight. So it's kind of crazy what's going on. I mean, they got a really tough schedule coming up after the Georgetown game on Saturday. So yeah, I mean, that's when we're gonna really see how this team plays on the road.
Yep. That's all there is to say right now. But now we're going to turn our focus to the topic of the episode. It's especially topical tonight. I love Big 12 basketball on Tuesday nights. I think it's a great marketing strategy. One thing I want to talk about, the one game that was going on tonight in the Big 12, Texas versus Iowa State, a top 12 matchup, was on ESPN Plus. That's how many good games there were in the Big 12. Let's talk about it, fellas. This is a conference now that has more teams ranked than they don't, if that makes sense. There are 10 teams in the conference. 6 of them are ranked. Right now, atop the conference is the Kansas State Wildcats. I think if people would have said that prior to the year, you would have actually been excommunicated from the college basketball community because that sounds crazy, even seeing what we've seen. Kansas is at 2. Texas finds themselves at 3. Iowa State at 4. I think that will be flopped. I think my thing needs to update because obviously Iowa State beat Texas today. TCU, then Baylor at 21. Then to the unranked teams, still teams that are winning records. Porter Moser's squad, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, and without a win in the conference, the 2 teams are West Virginia and Texas Tech. Let's start with the bottom, fellas. Texas Tech gave Texas about as good of a fight as you could have asked for in Austin a couple days back. West Virginia, that was a game that Xavier really had to gut out at home. They looked really good. Those 2 teams are winless in the conference. That's where we're starting. 2 great teams that are winless. Let's start with those 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at those 2 teams, like that's kind of like all you need to see to know how good this conference kind of is. Like the fact that both those teams are 0-5 in this conference is like ridiculous. I think Texas Tech hasn't been great. But that team, like you put them in the American right now, they have like 1 or 2 losses in the conference. You put them in a lot of conferences right now, they're probably thriving. But the Big 12 is an absolute gauntlet. Like I think, like you said, if you told anyone that Kansas State was going to be 16-2 and 5-1 in this conference, I think they said on the broadcast tonight that Jerome Tang inherited like 2 scholarship players. So like you can say what you want about the transfer portal, but that's why you need it. Obviously, like it's free agency, but that dude put together a team of a top 15 team in a couple months, if that. JUCO guys, transfer portal guys, a couple freshmen. Like he's thrown together a random group of guys, and they're 16-2 right now, and they look incredible. So this conference is unbelievable. And what's scary is you're adding Houston to it. So like, I don't obviously Houston probably won't be like number one next year, but I mean, dude, like this conference is ridiculously loaded. Like you said, more teams are ranked than not. And then you have like going to Oklahoma is never fun. Going to West Virginia is never fun. At Texas Tech, who has a very annoying defense. Like
Oklahoma
there's zero.
State. It's
Yeah, there is.
Oklahoma
There's zero
State
easy
sucks
games.
to win there. Xavier won there last year, and Matt, that was probably the most hard-fought win Xavier had all year, even including Big East games. That was incredibly tough, and Oklahoma State wasn't even good. Not to mention the strength of the conference, Carson. They've got a Player of the Year candidate as well in Wilson with
sure.
Kansas, and he may not even win his own conference. Which
this conference is, I mean, between them and the SEC, I give the Big 12 a leg up right now, but like the Big 12 is just ridiculous right now. Every team is like, there's 7 or 8 teams that I could see easily, not easily, but like Elite 8 contenders. Like there's a bunch of teams that right now are just look great.
All right. We've talked about the bottom starting there. Let's move to Baylor, because I think Baylor's a very interesting team. Coach Drew, he's had a lot of success. They're kind of up and down and up and down. They find themselves at 2-3 in the conference. We saw earlier they went to Marquette against Shaka Smart, lost a beatdown in that game. That was almost 2 months ago at this point. Do we think Baylor at number 21 in the country, they're 12-5 overall at 2-3 in the conference, are they a real contender for this conference, or are they just a middle of the pack team that happens to be better than a lot of other teams outside the conference?
I wouldn't say they're just a middle of the pack team, but I mean, God, they got to start like taking care of their home court, because they had that TCU game at home and that Kansas State game at home. They lost those 2 games by a combined 3 points.
Yeah.
I mean, if they win those 2 games, we're talking about Baylor at the top of the conference right now, and they're a top 12 team.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because they've beaten Gonzaga and UCLA, so like they have a resume. They're building a resume. It's just a matter of like they've lost a couple. Like if you flip the 2 results of the Kansas State game and the TCU game, I mean, they're maybe 1 in the conference, right? Like you flip a couple, 2 or 3 of those games that are 1 possession. That's just how this conference is right now. Like you lose a couple games, you could get buried kind of quickly. So I think they're a really good team. I think Scott Drew is an incredible coach, but yeah, like I said, I mean, they've beaten UCLA on the road and they beat Gonzaga. So I think they'll be fine. Like we've talked about, like they go to Oklahoma. That's a pretty good win. And then pretty good game to pick up a win. And then they play Kansas at home. So you can get your losses back pretty quickly in this conference.
Yeah. Next up, TCU. Carson, I think you texted us this about a week ago. They are exciting to watch right now. That's another home court. I feel like the other thing that has helped the Big 12 so much, there's been so many freaking renovations to their courts in the last 5 years. Oklahoma State was one. Texas, obviously. TCU just got renovated, I think, 3 years ago. Obviously, Kansas, they're playing in a historic gym, so you're not going to really have many renovations there. And I want to say Oklahoma also got renovated relatively recently. These gyms are awesome, but it's producing great teams, and TCU is one of those great teams playing really exciting basketball.
I love the way like TCU plays. They play a very up-tempo like style of basketball, which I always love. I mean, I know some people like watching like grinded out games, like really good defense. Some people really like that for some reason. I'm not that kind of guy. I love watching teams like get out in transition and put up a ton of points. That's why I love the TCU Kansas State game. Like that game was literally a track meet. It was just whoever had the ball last kind of thing. So I mean, yeah, not Kansas. I'm thinking of a different game. That was the Kansas State Baylor game, I think. But TCU just plays really quickly. They killed Kansas State actually. But yeah, I mean, they're a very, very good team. It's kind of hard to say who like the favorite to win this conference is. Like, I'd love to say Kansas, but we just saw Kansas State knock them off. But I don't know. Like this conference is just weird right now. It's hard to I don't think there's a clear favorite, which is kind of really cool if you think about it. Like I think there's 4 or 5 teams right now that could easily win it. And the fact that like Baylor's like 2-3 in the conference, and like, yeah, there's numerous teams that we could see at the top at the end of this.
Yeah, I was also gonna say TCU reminds me a lot of Baylor. Like in their
Mhm.
conference play action because they also are losing. They're winning and losing games by such a small margin. And that's also just like what makes this conference such a attractive thing to watch.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, for sure. And TCU, it feels like another team that could just find themselves in the mix at the end of the year if they just keep on winning here or there. Next up, Iowa State. Iowa State's an interesting team. They had a up and down non-conference, then they got into conference play. They're winning by small margins besides the win against Texas Tech. They win by 3 against Oklahoma. They won by 15 against Baylor. That was at home, of course, but they win against TCU by 2. They're very sneaking out these games. They only lost by 2 to Kansas, and they picked up a win at home against Texas tonight. Are we buying into the hype for Iowa State, or do we think this is a team that might flop going down the stretch in the Big 12?
I think Iowa State's really good, but like you said, like it sounds stupid, but yeah, you could flip a couple of these results and they'd have a different record. I mean, but then again, like they lost by 2 to Kansas on the road. Like, so they've had this conference is full of close games. Like that's just how it's going to be, I think. That's why we said like whoever can sneak out a game here and there on the road, like that's just going to be huge. Like every game on the road is going to be massive. Every game in general is going to be massive, but going on the road in this conference is going to be a gauntlet. And I think Iowa State's, we like time will tell to see how like sustainable this really is. But I mean, they're 5-1 right now. And yeah, I think it's hard to say like they're not buying into it if you've beaten some of the best teams of this conference already. So I think what they're doing right now is impressive, and we'll see if they can hold it up, obviously.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a big thing to look for. Now we get to the top 3 of this conference, and these feel like 3 teams that will most likely find themselves in the top 10. Looking at Texas, they lose tonight at Iowa State, but they got a game against West Virginia. It's at West Virginia, so you pick up that win. You assume that they'll retain their top 10 ranking. Kansas State's going to jump up to the top 10. Kansas is going to move down a little bit, but not that much. You got Texas, Kansas, Kansas State. Out of these 3 teams, who do we like the most? What are we looking forward to? Matt, you make a good point. SEC Challenge coming up. Texas travels to Tennessee. That's going to be another top 10 matchup as it stands right now. What are we looking forward to, and who do we like out of those 3?
I just automatically favor Bill Self, kind of like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like something about the way Kansas plays feels a lot more sustainable. I think Kansas State is really good, but you saw tonight, like if Kansas shot slightly better, like they could have won that game by a good amount. I'm not a huge fan of hypotheticals, but it felt like Kansas did like everything they could to try to lose that game, and they still lost by 1. I think they shot like 5 of like 28 from 3 or something like that. Grady Dick had a bad game. And like, so I'm not going to take anything away from Kansas State, but I think the way Kansas plays is a lot more sustainable. So I'm always going to take a Bill Self team over just about anybody, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
I'm also going to take Kansas because, I mean, they got 3 stars on their team. 3 guys that, I mean, Grady Dick's is arguably the best freshman in the country. Jalen Wilson's one of the best players in the country. He's looking like a Wooden Warp winner. And I loved what I saw at KJ Adams tonight. That guy, like, he's one of the most athletic players I've seen. He can jump out of the building. I mean, he can score the basketball. And, yeah, I mean, I think there's too much talent for Kansas. And I don't think other people can compare their talent, their team. And then, of course, like what Carson said, I'm not going to bet against Bill Self and the history he's had with winning the Big 12.
Yeah.
I love a random thing about Kansas is I love the way their team's like constructed. Like I think they have a little bit of everything. Like you said, KJ Adams, and then you have Grady Dick, who's a knockdown shooter. Jalen Wilson's kind of like a do-it-all guy. Kevin McCullough, another do-it-all guy. He had a terrible game tonight, but he's another guy that puts up like 10 and 6, 10 and 7. It feels like Harris, their point guard. He's the definition of like a floor general. For my comp, I think Cole will go like this if he's watched Kansas, but he feels like a Mike Adams Woods kind of player. Like it's kind of I was watching the game tonight and it just felt like Woods is probably more aggressive offensively, but I love the way both of them control the ball. And I think both are like relied upon heavily and maybe underappreciated because of the way they take care of the ball. I think that's such like an underrated like aspect of college basketball, like having a point guard that you trust so much to have the ball in their hand. They're not going to turn it over. They're not going to take stupid shots and not going to have stupid fouls. Like, I think that's so huge, especially to win in March.
I think he'd be more consistent like Adams Woods because
Yeah, for sure.
like Adams Woods like opened a lot of eyes this year. Like a lot of people weren't very high on him, like for the right reason. I mean, like he has not like done anything at UC that's like, oh my god, like
Yeah,
he's one of the greatest ever. But like he's played very well this year, but just also very streaky.
for sure.
So I think he's just like less consistent.
The only thing I will add on Kansas, and this goes back to not betting against Bill Self, they protect their home floor so well. They've done it for years and years at the field house. So it just feels like you give Kansas within a game or two down the stretch, they've got 3 home games out of 5 games to end the conference play. They're not really going to give you those games. So it just feels like it's hard to say that if they're within striking distance at the end of it, that they won't finish it out because of that. So yeah, I think Texas has a legit shot, but you also have to acknowledge the guys that Kansas has, and they are going to get a chance to avenge that loss against Kansas State in the future here. So it does feel like a long shot for either of those teams to dethrone the previous champ of this conference.
The other thing is like Kansas State's top 15 and they still storm the floor beating like a top 5. Like that just shows you like it's Kansas. Like you just never expect to beat a team like Kansas State should have not like I'll say like they should have won tonight. Like realistically, like
I agree.
Top 12, 13 team on your home floor, massive game. Like you should win that game. And like the storm of the floor, like that's just like you're like that's Kansas. That's the reputation they have. And like I said, like Kansas almost went out of their way to lose that game tonight. So I wouldn't be surprised if they beat Kansas State by a good margin at home. Like that's nothing against Kansas State. I'm just think if Kansas played slightly better tonight, they would have won that game for sure. And so put them on their home floor against them again. Like I think Kansas will absolutely win that game.
Yeah. And usually you bring up a good point, Carson. Usually I am completely anti-ranked team storming the floor over a win, but I will give Kansas State the pass here because realistically, how many times I think if you're a Kansas State student, that's most likely going to be the only time you've gotten to or will get to beat Kansas going forward. So live it up, Kansas State, Wildcats, good win. Kansas State as a school on the up and up. They had a good football season.
Yeah.
They win the Big 12.
Their athletics are shooting up the ranks.
Yeah, for sure. All right, I'm going to do what we always do. Going around the table, Carson, start us off. End of the year Big 12 champ. Give me a regular season and a tournament because I do want to get that distinction, especially for a tough conference like this.
So regular season, I'm going to give it to Kansas. That's like kind of a layup pick. It's a regular pick, but I don't think they'll win the conference tournament. For conference tournament, I'm going to say TCU or Kansas State. I think one of those two teams will win it. I'm going to lean Kansas State. I just think the way they play is like, I don't know. I just feel like they're like the type of team that would win it conference tournament. But I think Kansas will win the regular season just because I think they'll win just like more regular games. But in terms of like back-to-back days, like 2-3 games in a row, I think Kansas State will win the conference tournament.
All right. I like that. Matt, what do you got?
I gotta say Kansas too. I mean, you never want to bet against Bill Self winning regular season Big 12 championship. But for the conference tournament, I'm going to say TCU. I love what I've seen from them so far in the conference. And I just love how they play. We talked about it earlier. They play a really fun brand of basketball. And I think that's going to work great in March.
Yeah. And one thing, Matt, I do want to say, kind of circling back, TCU and Xavier, we're seeing a lot of people on Twitter, even neutral guys. That's kind of been the vibe of both those teams. Even though some of those teams may be different, they do play both very fun brands of basketball, punch for punch, just always coming back with something better, it seems like, in their games. And they've been both able to finish a lot of them.
The thing is, like, for both those teams, like, there's going to be no shortage of points. Any team that can get up and down the floor and score quickly, like, you're going to be in just about any game unless you go, like, for some reason, go ice cold. So that's why I think TCU and Kansas State are, like, to me, like, maybe better March teams, just because like they could fill up 85, 90 points against a team like any given night. It's just how good they are offensively.
Yeah. No, I agree. Cole, what do you got? Regular season, tournament champ.
Don't mean to jump on the bandwagon, but Kansas as well. I mean, that's almost a guaranteed thing. Like most years, like death, tax, and Bill Self winning a Big 12 championship. But well, and like the funny thing about this question is like you could look like an absolute idiot. Like the team you pick could literally finish sixth.
Yeah.
And also like in the conference tournament, like your team could also lose in the first round. So, I like Kansas State. I mean, like you guys were talking about earlier with Keontae Johnson being back to probably better than his form where he was at Florida. Like that's terrifying. So like if they somehow stay hot, they're bound to lose a game or two. It's the Big 12, but like it's honestly, I think Kansas State just because they've proven that they can get so hot so fast, and so it's honestly gonna be the team that's hottest that week of March.
What's funny too is you said like team could finish sixth, but I think the team that finishes like fifth or sixth could like miss out on like the first spot by like 1 or 2 games. Like I think
also they could also go like to the Elite Eight, like you said.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I agree. Call me just wanting to be different, but I'm going to take Texas for the regular season. I talked about how they defend the field house well. I think on February 6th at 9 p.m. on ESPN, Texas is going to march into Kansas and pick up a win. Now, with that being said, I think those two are going to trade away losses or away wins. So I think back at the end of to end the regular season on March the 4th, Texas is going to lose at home to Kansas as well. I think Kansas will win the tournament, but I think Texas is going to win the regular season title, have the 1 seed, and I think Kansas will fall probably at the 2. I think they're going to have revenge on their mind. They're going to really want to get the train rolling into March and really make a run at this thing again. So I'm going to take Texas for the regular season, Kansas for the tournament, and yeah, that's what I got in the Big 12. But guys, we've talked about it. This is the best conference in college basketball. I can confidently say it. This is the most fun conference, I feel like, in college basketball. There's going to be a lot of really, really fun games going down the stretch in the Big 12.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if like 3 or 4 of these teams are in the Sweet 16 at the end of it. Like just the way all these teams, like this conference is loaded. And like you said, it's just a very fun conference to watch. Any given night, anyone can beat anybody. I mean, Oklahoma almost went into Kansas and beat Kansas. You just never know what you're going to get. That's why it's so fun.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think this is going to be consistently one of the most fun conferences going down the stretch. But there it is. That's our breakdown on the Big 12. Guys, we got anything else to talk about around college basketball? If not, we'll send this one home.
That's it.
I got one thing for the UC guys. I'm really looking at the Big 12 this year and implanting a team like UC. I just want to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Because I know Wes Miller's still trying to build his own program and get his guys there. I feel like it's a really tough conference to do that, and I think I feel like in the perfect place to do it right now in the American. But I mean, God, going into the Big 12 next year, that's gonna be super tough.
For sure. So I've talked about this a ton with just a lot of different people. My biggest thing is the team they have right now obviously would not be great in the Big 12, but realistically you bring in 2 top 50, 60 recruits. So you're adding talent. I think the biggest thing is going to be probably retaining a guy like Landers Nolly and maybe Mike Adams-Woods and then adding a big guy. But I think they could be, I've talked to like I said, I've talked to people about this. I think if they keep adding talent, they land a couple of the guys that have been rumored to UC's been in contention for, they could have a ton of talent next year. Now, whether or not that meshes and succeeds in a conference like the Big 12 is yet to be seen. But like you said, it's definitely a brutal time to transition into the Big 12 because of how many good teams there are. But I mean, yeah, I think we'll see. I think a lot of it will depend on the offseason and what the transfer portal does for them and who comes back and how good the freshmen are.
Yeah.
And it's a fair point. It's going to be a very tough transition. You're right, Carson.
Sure.
This is the worst time to get into the Big 12 just because it's such a rock fight. already. Cole, you got anything to add on that topic, or you think Carson summed it up?
He's got it. I mean, yeah. I mean, I was just gonna like basically repeat it, so might as well not waste your guys' time.
All right. Well, this has been a very fun episode, guys. I feel like we've covered a lot of different concepts in college basketball, whether it be mid-majors, talking about the best conference in it, top 25. It's been a lot of fun. Matt and I were texting. This has been fun, I think, for all of us, just to get to talk college basketball, and just talk about some of our favorite teams, what we're seeing. It's been a lot of fun, and it's only going to get better. As John Rothstein says, this is only January. So we're headed towards March. We're going to have a lot of fun getting there, guys. But it's been a lot of fun. This was episode 7. Thanks for tuning in on Spotify, YouTube, whatever it may be. If you haven't gotten a chance to, go ahead and look at some of the old episodes. That there's some good stuff on there too. But yeah, a lot to look forward to and finding Nylon from here on out. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. We'll see you next time.